Let's say you own one rental property generating £300 per month after costs and tax. That's a solid starting point, but on its own, it's unlikely to create meaningful long-term income. The question then becomes, how do you go from one property to several? Because building a buy-to-let portfolio isn't just about buying more properties, it's about doing it in a way that remains financially stable over time. In this video, I'll walk you through how that process actually works in practice. The key idea behind a portfolio is simple. You're not relying on one property, you're building a collection of properties that work together. Each one contributes a relatively small amount of income, but combined together, they create something more meaningful. The important point is that the process is gradual. Most portfolios are not built quickly, they're built consistently over time. Let's start with the first property. You invest your initial capital, buy a property, and begin generating rental income. At this stage, your focus is usually on stability, making sure the property works as expected. Because everything else that follows depends on that first step being solid. A weak first deal can slow down everything else. One of the key drivers of portfolio growth is reinvestment. Instead of taking all the income out, many landlords reinvest part of it into future purchases. This could mean saving rental income over time, or combining it with other capital. The idea is that each property helps fund the next one. This process takes time. Buying multiple properties within a short period can create financial pressure. Instead, most portfolios grow over several years. That allows income, equity, and experience to build gradually. And that gradual approach tends to be more sustainable. Equity also plays a role. As property values change over time, the equity in a property may increase. In some cases, this can be used to further support investment. But it's important not to rely on this alone, because property values don't always move in one direction. Cash flow becomes more important as you add properties. One property with weak cash flow may be manageable, but several properties with weak cash flow can create pressure. So each additional property needs to contribute positively. That's what keeps the portfolio stable. Risk increases as the portfolio grows. More properties mean more exposure to costs, voids, and market changes. But it also means diversification. One property underperforming has less impact when it's part of a wider portfolio. So growth increases both opportunity and responsibility. Financing also becomes more important. The way your mortgages are structured affects how easily you can continue to grow. Lenders will assess your overall position, not just individual properties. So planning financially early can make the process smoother later. Structure becomes more relevant as the portfolio grows. Holding one property personally is straightforward, but holding several properties may introduce different considerations. For example, tax treatment, reinvestment flexibility, and long-term planning will all come into play. Some landlords begin to think about structure more carefully once they move beyond their first or second property. This doesn't mean there is a single correct approach, but it does mean that decisions made early can have a noticeable impact later on. As you add properties, costs don't just increase, they scale. Maintenance, management, and compliance all become more significant. For example, one property needing work is manageable. Several properties needing work at the same time can create pressure. This is why having a financial buffer becomes more important as the portfolio grows. It allows you to absorb these periods without disruption. Managing multiple properties is also more complex. There are more tenants, more contracts, more timelines, and more potential issues to manage. Some landlords choose to handle this themselves, while others use letting agents. Either way, there is a trade-off between time and cost, and that balance becomes more important as the portfolio expands. Portfolio building is ultimately a long-term strategy. It's not about short-term gains, but about steady accumulation over time. This means focusing on consistency rather than speed. A slower, more stable approach often leads to better outcomes than trying to scale too quickly, because stability allows the portfolio to grow sustainably. A common mistake is trying to grow too quickly, taking on too much debt, or buying properties without strong fundamentals. Another mistake is ignoring cash flow, focusing instead on future expectations. These approaches can work temporarily, but often create problems later. A more measured approach tends to be more resilient. A simple framework for portfolio growth is: does each property stand on its own 2 feet financially? Does the portfolio remain stable if something changes in the marketplace? And does growth feel comfortable and not stretched? These questions help maintain balance as the portfolio develops, and they reduce the likelihood of taking on unnecessary risk. Building a buy-to-let portfolio takes time, and it requires consistency rather than speed. Each property is a step, not a shortcut, and the strength of the portfolio depends on the strength of each individual decision. Understanding that process puts you in a much stronger position over time. This is the practical landlord.